36. My grandmother had only one younger sister. Her life was full of hardship, and she almost never talked about her own mother. The only time I ever heard her mention her childhood was one summer night when I was very little, sitting on the bamboo mat in our courtyard, looking up at the stars. She told me that when the Japanese army entered Taizhou, her father was taken away for human experiments. A few days later, he was carried home with his eyes gouged out, and he died soon afterward. After that, it was just my grandmother and her little sister, 2 children depending on each other to survive. The most dangerous moment they ever faced was when the Japanese soldiers came to search the neighborhood. The 2 little girls hid inside a pile of grass in the kitchen. The soldiers stabbed into the grass with their bayonets a few times, but didn't find them and eventually left. At that time, their family lived in a small alley a bit west of where Yueshan Square is today. There was a dock nearby, so my grandmother survived by carrying a wooden box and selling cigarettes on the street. Her aunt lived right next door and helped the 2 children whenever she could. I've actually been to that alley with my grandmother when I was younger. My grandaunt's family still lived there then. Later, the whole place was torn down and turned into the Wenta market. Because of everything she lived through during the war, my grandmother could never bring herself to like anything Japanese. Even after she married my grandfather and moved to Giluo East Alley, she still experienced raids by Japanese soldiers. For some reason I still don't fully understand, whenever my grandfather hung the Japanese flag at the door, the soldiers wouldn't go inside. Later, when the family bought anything made in Japan, they would only say the brand name but never mention the country. My grandmother was illiterate for most of her early life. She lost both parents when she was very young and only learned to write her own name many years later in the night classes at the second textile factory. So as long as no one told her the item was Japanese, she didn't know. My grandmother raised her younger sister by selling cigarettes with that wooden box on the street. When they grew older, both she and my grandfather worked at the second textile factory. That's how they met and eventually got married. She moved from the old alley near Yueshan Square to Giluo East Alley, where my aunt and my mother were born. She would have had a little son too, but because the family was too poor, she had to end the pregnancy. Whenever she talked about it, she couldn't help crying. Despite all the hardship, my grandmother never complained about my grandfather, and she never blamed him for not earning much. Later on, he left the textile factory and transferred to a refrigeration equipment factory. At that time, he was one of the few educated workers, and the factory director wanted him to become the successor. But my grandfather refused firmly. His reason was simple: being a leader meant responsibility, and he didn't want that. He preferred to be a warehouse keeper, get his wages, and have a peaceful life. When my aunt told me this story, both she and I felt frustrated. It seemed like we were the only two who cared about being poor. My grandmother, my grandfather, and my mother never saw poverty as something unbearable. They had simply lived through it since childhood. For a period of time, my grandparents and my aunt used to weave fishing nets at home. My aunt was in high school then, studying at No. 2 Middle School, which was just a little north of their house. When I was little, I used to rummage around in the house and would still find the wooden shuttles they used for weaving the nets.